October 15, 1943, near the village of Prokhorovka in the Soviet Union. The autumn mud clung to everything like wet concrete, and the morning mist hung low over the beet fields, where 17-year-old Katya Volkov guided her family's ancient Fordson tractor through the furrows. The machine wheezed and coughed, its engine barely managing to pull the heavy plow through the waterlogged earth. German armored units had been spotted moving through the region, but Katya's father insisted the harvest couldn't wait. Winter was coming, and without these beets, the family would starve. What neither Katya nor the approaching German tank crew could possibly imagine was that this routine farming operation would become one of the most unlikely encounters of the entire conflict, proving that sometimes the most devastating weapons are the ones nobody sees coming. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. In the next few hours, a simple farm girl's intimate knowledge of her family's land would transform what should have been a routine German reconnaissance mission into a costly lesson about underestimating local ingenuity. The distant rumble that interrupted Katya's morning routine came not from thunder, but from the throaty growl of a Maybach HL 230 engine pushing 45 tons of steel through the muddy countryside. Tiger Tank, number 407 of the 503rd Heavy Tank Battalion, was conducting what its commander, Obergefreiter Hans Müller, believed would be a simple reconnaissance sweep. The massive machine represented the pinnacle of German engineering. Its 88mm gun could penetrate any Soviet armor at distances exceeding 2 kilometers, while its frontal armor remained virtually impervious to most enemy weapons. Müller peered through his commander's cupola, scanning the peaceful agricultural landscape ahead. At 24 years old, he had already participated in 17 major engagements across the Eastern Front, earning both the Iron Cross and a reputation for tactical brilliance among his peers. His crew, gunner Franz Weber, driver Klaus Richter, loader Otto Brenner, and radio operator Erich Hoffmann, had worked together for 8 months, developing the kind of seamless coordination that kept them alive in an environment where the average tank crew survived less than 6 weeks. "Boring countryside," Weber muttered into his throat microphone, adjusting the elevation on his main gun as they crested a small hill. "Nothing but mud and more mud." The Tiger's weight distribution, designed for the firm ground of Western Europe, made it particularly vulnerable in the soft, churned earth of the Russian autumn. Each track left deep grooves in the saturated soil, and Müller could feel the machine working harder than usual to maintain forward momentum. Still, he felt confident in their mission parameters. Intelligence suggested minimal Soviet presence in this sector, and their route would bring them back to friendly lines before nightfall. What Müller's intelligence reports failed to mention was the Volkov family farm, situated in a depression between 2 low hills that made it invisible from the main roads. Alexei Volkov had chosen this location deliberately when he established the farm in 1931, seeking protection from both the harsh steppe winds and unwanted attention from government officials during the collectivization period. The natural bowl formed by the surrounding hills created ideal growing conditions for sugar beets, but it also formed what military engineers would recognize as a perfect trap. Katya had grown up intimately familiar with every meter of her family's 140-hectare holding. She knew which sections became impassable after rain, where the old drainage ditches ran beneath the surface, and most importantly, where her grandfather had dug an elaborate network of root cellars and storage pits during the previous decade. These underground chambers, designed to protect the family's seed stores and preserved foods from both weather and requisition squads, honeycombed the area beneath what appeared to be solid farmland. The Fordson tractor that served as the family's primary work machine had been purchased used from a collective farm liquidation in 1938. Its 4-cylinder engine produced barely 27 horsepower, making it laughably underpowered compared to modern agricultural equipment, but Alexei Volkov had chosen it specifically for its reliability and ease of repair. More importantly, its narrow track width and relatively light weight, just over 2 tons, allowed it to traverse ground that would bog down heavier machinery. As Müller's Tiger approached the crest of the hill overlooking the Volkov farm, radio operator Hoffmann picked up fragmentary transmissions suggesting increased Soviet activity in sectors to their north and east. The information remained incomplete, but it added urgency to their reconnaissance mission. Division headquarters needed accurate intelligence about road conditions and defensive positions before committing additional armor to the region. "Target ahead!" Weber announced suddenly, his voice sharp with excitement. Through his gun sight, he had spotted movement in the valley below, a single tractor working slowly through a muddy field. "Looks like a farmer. Should we engage?" Miller studied the scene through his binoculars. The target presented no obvious military threat, but standing orders emphasized the importance of denying agricultural resources to enemy forces. More practically, any civilian in this area might report their position to Soviet units operating nearby. Standard doctrine called for eliminating such potential intelligence sources. However, something about the situation troubled Muller's tactical instincts. The tractor operator seemed completely unaware of their presence, continuing to plow in methodical lines despite the obvious sounds of their approach. Either this farmer was deaf or confident that no German units operated in the area. Both possibilities suggested information that might prove valuable if the operator could be questioned rather than simply eliminated. "Hold fire," Muller decided. "We'll get closer and see what this farmer knows about enemy movements." The Tiger began its descent toward the farm, tracks churning through the increasingly soft earth as gravity and 45 tons of momentum carried them down the gentle slope. Muller felt the familiar sensation of the machine settling slightly as they entered the depression, the ground becoming noticeably softer beneath their tracks. Katya had actually spotted the German tank several minutes earlier, the morning sun glinting off its angular turret as it paused on the hilltop above her family's land. Years of living in a war zone had taught her to recognize the profiles of various military vehicles, and the distinctive squared-off silhouette left no doubt about what was approaching. A Tiger tank, the most feared predator on any battlefield, capable of destroying entire infantry formations or reducing buildings to rubble with single shots. Her first instinct was to abandon the tractor and run for the farmhouse where her parents and younger brother waited. But decades of farming experience had taught the Volkov family to think 3 steps ahead of any crisis, and Katya's mind was already working through alternatives. The Tiger was descending directly toward their property, following the natural contours of the land. Its chosen path would bring it directly across the section of field where her grandfather had constructed his most elaborate root cellar system. The underground storage complex lay approximately 15 meters below the surface, accessed through carefully disguised entrances scattered throughout the area. More importantly, the excavation had required removing enormous quantities of earth, creating a vast hollow space that her grandfather had reinforced with timber supports salvaged from old buildings. The roof of this underground chamber lay less than 3 meters beneath what appeared to be solid ground, camouflaged by years of careful cultivation that made the surface indistinguishable from the surrounding farmland. Katya's father had always warned that the ceiling supports might not withstand truly heavy loads, but this limitation had never presented practical problems. The Fordson tractor distributed its weight across relatively wide tracks, and even loaded farm wagons rarely exceeded 5 tons total weight. However, a Tiger tank represented an entirely different category of stress. 45 tons concentrated onto 2 narrow track surfaces, applying ground pressure that could exceed the structural limits of the hidden chamber below. Instead of fleeing, Katya made a decision that would have seemed insane to any trained military observer. She turned the Fordson toward the approaching tank, increasing throttle and heading directly across the treacherous section of field. To Muller and his crew, her action appeared to be either panic-driven flight or possibly an attempt to lead them away from the farmhouse where other family members might be hiding. "Farmers running," Weber observed. "Should I put a round into the tractor?" "Negative," Muller replied. "Let's see where this goes. Driver, follow that tractor. Maintain distance, but keep them in sight." Richter, the Tiger's driver, adjusted course to intercept the fleeing agricultural machine. From his position low in the hull, his vision was limited to narrow periscope slits, but the target was large enough and slow enough to track easily. The soft ground continued to challenge their progress, But the Tiger's superior power and traction systems kept them moving forward at a steady pace. What neither Richter nor Muller could observe from their positions was the subtle change in ground consistency as they pursued Katya across the field. The surface remained visually identical, the same churned mud and scattered vegetation that characterized the entire area, but beneath their tracks, the solid earth gradually gave way to the reinforced roof of the hidden storage complex. Katya could feel the difference immediately. The Fordson's narrow tracks detected the slight hollow sound that indicated they were crossing above the root cellar, a sensation she had experienced countless times during normal farming operations. Her grandfather's construction had been designed to support agricultural loads indefinitely, and she felt no concern about traversing the area with her lightweight tractor. The Tiger, however, represented a completely different engineering challenge. Each track applied approximately 15 tons of pressure across its contact area, while the vehicle's momentum added dynamic loading that multiplied the effective stress on any supporting structure. As Müller's machine crossed onto the concealed chamber, stress fractures began propagating through the aging timber supports that held up the earthen roof. "Ground feels strange here," Richter reported through the intercom. "Softer than it looks." Müller was too focused on the fleeing tractor to pay attention to his driver's observation. The agricultural machine maintained its agonizingly slow pace, appearing to struggle through the muddy conditions, but never quite stopping or changing direction dramatically enough to lose their pursuit. From a tactical perspective, the situation seemed completely under control. Weber kept his main gun trained on the target, though at this range he could have disabled the tractor with a single machine gun burst. The 88mm cannon seemed almost comically oversized for the task, like using artillery to swat flies. Still, orders were orders, and eliminating agricultural resources fell within their mission parameters. "Shall I disable the tractor now?" Weber asked. "Wait until we're closer," Müller decided. "I want to question the operator first." The first indication of serious trouble came not from any dramatic collapse, but from a subtle settling sensation that experienced tank crews learned to recognize as a warning of unstable ground. Richter felt the Tiger's hull dip slightly, just a few centimeters, but enough to change the machine's attitude noticeably. "Sir, I think we have a problem," he reported. Muller was about to respond when the settling became much more pronounced. The Tiger's weight had finally exceeded the load-bearing capacity of the hidden chamber's roof structure, and the compromised timber supports began failing in rapid succession. What happened next unfolded with the inexorable momentum of an avalanche. The roof collapsed not all at once, but in stages that made the disaster even more catastrophic for the trapped vehicle. The front section of track broke through first, causing the Tiger's nose to pitch downward at an alarming angle. This shift transferred additional weight to the rear sections, accelerating the structural failure and causing the entire machine to sink deeper into the concealed chamber. "Emergency reverse!" Muller shouted, but Richter's desperate attempts to back out of the trap only made the situation worse. The Tiger's tracks spun uselessly in the loose earth and broken timber, while the machine continued settling deeper into the underground cavity. Within less than 30 seconds, the feared Tiger tank, capable of engaging enemy armor at distances exceeding 2 kilometers, had become completely immobilized in what appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary farm field. The turret remained above ground level, but the hull was buried deep enough that the crew couldn't open any of their escape hatches. Katya brought her tractor to a stop and turned to observe the results of her improvised trap. The sight that greeted her exceeded even her most optimistic expectations. The massive German tank sat helplessly embedded in her grandfather's root cellar, its tracks spinning futilely in the air while the crew's voices echoed from inside the buried hull. The psychological impact on Müller's crew was devastating. They had entered this mission confident in their superiority over any potential opposition, backed by the most advanced tank technology available to any military force. Now they found themselves trapped by what appeared to be a simple farm girl who had somehow turned their own momentum against them. What just happened? "Brenner?" the loader asked in a voice that barely concealed panic. Müller struggled to maintain command composure while assessing their situation. The Tiger's communication equipment remained functional, and he could still observe the surrounding area through his cupola, but the machine was obviously incapable of movement. Worse, their position made them sitting ducks for any Soviet forces that might investigate the commotion. "We drove into some kind of pit," he explained, though the words sounded inadequate even to him. The ground was undermined. Hoffman attempted to raise division headquarters on the radio, but the Tiger's buried position interfered with transmission quality. His fragmentary reports described being immobilized by unknown ground conditions, but failed to convey the full extent of their predicament. The immediate question became whether to abandon the vehicle or attempt some kind of recovery operation. Tiger tanks represented enormous investments in materials and manufacturing capacity. Each machine required approximately 300,000 man-hours to produce, using strategic materials that were increasingly scarce in wartime Germany. Abandoning such valuable equipment was not a decision to be made lightly. However, staying with the immobilized tank presented obvious tactical risks. Soviet forces in the area would inevitably investigate any reports of German armor, and the buried Tiger could neither fight effectively nor retreat if discovered. The crew found themselves caught between competing priorities, preserving valuable equipment versus preserving their own lives. Katya approached the trapped tank slowly, staying well outside the range of any personal weapons the crew might carry. From her position, she could see movement through the commander's cupola, confirming that at least some of the crew had survived the collapse. The tank's main gun remained potentially dangerous, but its depressed angle made it difficult to target anything at ground level. "Sprechen Sie Deutsch," she called out in carefully practiced pronunciation. Muller was startled to hear German words from their unlikely captor. His tactical training had not prepared him for negotiating with teenage farmers, especially ones who had just demonstrated an unsettling grasp of improvisational engineering. "We speak German," he replied cautiously. "Good," Katya continued, switching to accented but functional German that she had learned from a schoolteacher who had studied in Austria before the conflict. "You are stuck, yes? Maybe we can help." The offer of assistance from someone who had just trapped them struck Muller as either remarkably generous or potentially deceptive. However, their options remained severely limited. The Tiger's radio equipment had finally managed to establish contact with division headquarters, but the response was not encouraging. "Recovery operations impossible at this time," came the crackling reply. "Area too dangerous for heavy equipment. Crew advised to assess local alternatives." Translation: they were on their own. Muller made a decision that would have horrified his superiors. Opening his commander's hatch, he climbed out of the tank and stood on the buried hull, hands visible and empty. His crew watched in amazement as their commander essentially surrendered to a farm girl armed with nothing more dangerous than a rusty tractor. "What kind of help?" he asked. Katya gestured toward the farmhouse visible in the distance. "My father knows construction. Maybe we can build something to pull you out. But first you must promise no shooting." The negotiation that followed would have been absurd under normal circumstances. A veteran tank commander with 17 major engagements on his record was discussing engineering solutions with a teenager, whose primary qualifications involved growing beets. Yet the conversation proceeded with surprising practicality, focusing on leverage, fulcrum points, and load distribution rather than military protocols. Alexei Volkov arrived within the hour, bringing tools and a lifetime of experience with heavy machinery. His assessment of the situation was blunt, but not entirely discouraging. The Tiger could potentially be extracted, but only with specialized equipment and techniques that would require several days to implement. "Problem is weight distribution," he explained through his daughter's translation. "Tank is too heavy for normal pulling. We need to lift first, then pull. Very difficult. More importantly, any recovery operation would require the full cooperation of the German crew. The Tiger's own engine would provide essential power for the extraction, while crew members would need to operate various mechanical systems under direction from civilian engineers who understood local ground conditions. This arrangement created an unprecedented situation where enemy combatants worked alongside the people they had intended to intimidate or eliminate. Weber, the gunner, found himself taking instructions from Katya's younger brother about proper cable attachment points. Richter, the driver, learned to coordinate his throttle inputs with signals from Alexei Volkov, who couldn't speak German but communicated effectively through gestures and mechanical intuition. The extraction process took 3 full days, during which the German crew lived in the Volkov farmhouse and shared meals with the family they had originally planned to question as potential intelligence sources. The experience provided both sides with perspectives that military training had never addressed. Muller discovered that Soviet civilians in this region lived under conditions of genuine hardship, struggling to maintain basic agricultural production despite constant disruptions from military operations. The Volkov family's farm represented years of careful work that could be destroyed by a single misplaced artillery shell or the passage of heavy vehicles across vulnerable fields. Conversely, Katya and her family gained insights into the human reality behind German military operations. Müller's crew were not ideological fanatics or brutal occupation forces, but young men far from home who missed their own families and questioned many aspects of the conflict they were fighting. "Why did you help us?" Müller asked on their final evening as the extraction preparations neared completion. Katya considered the question carefully before responding. "Same reason you would help someone stuck in mud on your father's farm is the right thing to do." The successful extraction of Tiger 407 required a complex arrangement of levers, pulleys, and carefully positioned support timbers that turned the root cellar collapse into an elaborate mechanical advantage system. Alexei Volkov's engineering solution used the Tiger's own weight and the geometry of the pit to create lifting forces that gradually raised the buried machine to ground level. When the Tiger finally rolled free on October 18th, both the German crew and the Volkov family understood that something significant had changed in their understanding of the conflict. Müller had witnessed practical cooperation between enemies that demonstrated alternatives to the destructive dynamics he had experienced throughout the Eastern Front campaign. His final report to division headquarters described the incident as mechanical failure due to unexpected ground conditions, resolved through local resource utilization. The report made no mention of the 3 days spent as guests of the family he had originally planned to interrogate, or the engineering lessons learned from civilian farmers who understood their environment better than any military intelligence assessment. The Tiger returned to active duty, but Müller's tactical approach was permanently influenced by his experience at the Volkov farm. He began paying closer attention to local terrain features and civilian infrastructure, recognizing that environmental knowledge could be more decisive than firepower in determining tactical outcomes. For Katya and her family, the incident provided proof that individual initiative could influence events far beyond their apparent scope. A farm girl's understanding of her grandfather's construction project had neutralized one of the most feared weapons on any battlefield, demonstrating that military superiority could be undermined by local knowledge and practical intelligence. The Tiger tank continued operating until November 26th, when it was finally disabled by a Soviet anti-tank gun during the defense of Zhytomyr. However, Müller and his crew survived the engagement and were subsequently transferred to training duties in Germany, where they spent the remainder of the conflict teaching new tank commanders about the importance of understanding local ground conditions. Alexei Volkov expanded his engineering knowledge after the encounter, eventually becoming a consultant for post-conflict agricultural reconstruction projects throughout the region. His innovative solutions for heavy equipment recovery earned recognition from both Soviet authorities and international relief organizations working to restore agricultural production. Katya Volkova continued farming until 1947, when she accepted a scholarship to study agricultural engineering at Moscow University. Her thesis research focused on soil mechanics and load-bearing calculations for underground storage systems, drawing directly from her experience with the Tiger tank incident. After graduation, she returned to her home region as a technical advisor for collective farm mechanization programs. The root cellar system that had trapped the Tiger was rebuilt and expanded, serving the Volkov family for decades after the conflict ended. Visitors to the farm were often shown the site where a teenage girl had demonstrated that sometimes the most effective weapons were the ones nobody expected. Müller returned to his hometown in Bavaria after the conflict, where he established a construction company specializing in foundation work and underground excavation projects. His wartime experience with load distribution and structural engineering proved invaluable in civilian applications, though he rarely discussed the specific circumstances that had taught him these skills. The incident at the Volkov farm represented a microcosm of the larger conflict. Technological superiority confronting local knowledge, military doctrine meeting agricultural practicality, and human connections forming across ideological boundaries. In a conflict characterized by industrial-scale destruction and ideological hatred, the 3 days spent extracting a trapped tank offered a different model for how people might interact when circumstances forced them beyond their predetermined roles. The story of Katya Volkov and Tiger Tank 407 became part of local folklore, passed down through generations of farmers who understood that knowledge of the land could be more powerful than any weapon. It demonstrated that individual intelligence, practical skills, and basic human decency could influence historical events in ways that no military planner could anticipate or control. Years later, when historians analyzed the factors that determined tactical outcomes on the Eastern Front, they would focus on production statistics, strategic decisions, and technological advantages. They would largely overlook the countless individual encounters where local knowledge, personal initiative, and human connections shaped events in ways that battlefield reports never captured. The story of one farm girl's tractor trick and its impact on a Tiger Tank crew represented thousands of similar incidents that collectively influenced the course of the conflict more than any single major engagement. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.